So I might just now hand over to David Ali. David is the president of MND Australia. He's also on the MND Victoria board. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome, everybody. So on behalf of MND Australia, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to MND Connect. But before we start, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future, and the elders of any other communities that might be with us here today. So today's number 4, our 4th annual MND Connect, and it's fantastic to see that we've got 130 people registered today. So you've got your researchers, students, donors, MND associations, clinicians, and more importantly, people living with MND, their carers and family. I think this is a really unique opportunity for all of us to be focused on improving care and moving us closer to a world without MND. I just want to acknowledge a couple of people, and I'm going to ask them to stand, and fortunately they're both sitting next to each other, but I just want to acknowledge Shu No and Derek Stein, who can just stand. So thank you for the applause, because some of you might not know why you're applauding. But Shu and Derek, this is their brainchild. They started it 4 years ago, and it really demonstrates their commitment to bringing people together who are working with, or people who've got MND, bringing them together with researchers and clinicians. So thank you. We might just do another clap. Thank you. Today is a very interactive forum, and as Carol says, there's opportunities to ask questions, but if you don't get your question asked, there is that panel discussion. There's also lunch as an opportunity to bail up a researcher or any other presenter. So today you're going to hear from some of Australia's best and brightest MND experts who will cover a smorgasbord of topics. And they're things ranging from cognition and behaviour, managing bulbar symptoms and advances in communication technology, breathing and MND, different courses of MND, both genetics and environment, multidisciplinary care and palliative care, voluntary assisted dying, and the role of stem cells in screening drugs as potential therapies. There'll also be an update on clinical trials, and we'll also have here a carer's perspective. So all of this and more is under the theme, which is up there, MND, one disease with many faces. I should mention on Thursday the MND Australia Research Committee awarded $3.4 million in research grants, and this together with funds previously approved by the committee brings the total to $3.95 million for grants commencing in 2019. So that's absolutely brilliant in terms of the amount available for our established researchers, as well as continuing encouraging our young researchers to continue to dedicate their careers to MND. So as I mentioned, today's interactive. Today's about you. It's about people living with MND and your family and friends. And as you know, we all aspire to a world without MND. These MND experts here today and their colleagues, not only around Australia but also internationally, continue to work so hard until our vision of a world without MND is achieved. And through the state MND associations, we're committed to continue to care for people living with MND, to provide what they need and want to live better for longer. Apart from Shu and No, from Shu and Derek, there's a couple of, sorry, just getting all my names mixed up. There are a couple of people and organisations I do want to thank. I want to thank, sorry, I just flicked his name over, Professor Stephen Petro and Bradley Turner, both from the Florey Institute for Neurosciences and Mental Health in the University of Melbourne, who've been very generous in allowing us to use their facilities here. I also think, as Carol mentioned, we've had some funding from the Australian Department of Social Services, and so they provided some funding to assist people who are attending today. I'd also like to thank the Program Committee and the MND Australia team for developing today's program and also making today's event happen. and finally the presenters and others who've given up part of their weekend to be with us today. So on behalf of MND Australia, I welcome you again and thank you everybody for being here, and I hope you learn and share right through the day. So enjoy. Thank you. It now gives me great pleasure she asked me to keep this short, but I'm just going to rabbit on about her. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Susan Mathers from Calvary Healthcare, Bethlehem, to deliver the opening address. Susan is a consultant neurologist at Monash Medical Centre and the clinical director of neurology at Calvary Healthcare, Bethlehem, here in Melbourne. Calvary Healthcare Bethlehem provides neuro-rehabilitative and neuropalliative care to people with progressive neurological diseases, including over 200 people with MND. Susan is a member of the Motor Neurone Disease Research Institute of Australia, the MND Research Tissue Bank, and is a founding member of the Australian MND Register. Her main interests are, main professional interests, I'm sure she's got some personal interests, but her main interests are in the management of chronic progressive neurological diseases and models of care. Susan has participated in several government-sponsored collaborative projects in this area and is currently involved in a project to implement a statewide integrated care service for people with progressive neurological diseases in Victoria. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Susan Mathers.
Thank you very much for introduction and welcome to everybody here. I've been asked not so much to give you an address, but to give you a bit of an overview of today's speakers and the topics they're going to cover. And as you can see from our first slide, and the overarching theme of this is one disease with many faces. Now, I've added the question mark at the end of that because I suppose we're still a little uncertain as to whether we're just dealing with one disease or a number of diseases in this family. We're going to hear today from one person and about their experience of looking after their mother with motor neuron disease, and she's going to be our first speaker. One of the things that a word we're going to hear, I think, a fair bit of today is the word heterogeneity. MND is often called a very heterogeneous disease. That means it's a very diverse presentation. It's got many faces. And I suppose that the heterogeneity raises very many questions, research questions that we need to answer. Why, for instance, does MND tend to start in one part of the body? Why doesn't it start in all the motor neurons at once? Because they're all sitting there in the same body, in the same milieu. Why do some people start with weakness in one hand, and another person, it affects their foot? Or in a third person, it might affect their speech. Why do some people have a genetic form of the disease and have a family history of the disease, and yet 90% of people don't appear to have a single gene causing this disease? And why in the clinic can we not tell any difference between those with a genetic disease and those with a sporadic disease by just looking at them? So there's a lot for us to learn, and I think some of our speakers are going to tackle some of these issues for us today. One of the other things you're going to hear mentioned is the spectrum of this disease, and that's especially in relation to when we have pure motor neuron disease at one end of the spectrum with just motor symptoms, and we have pure frontotemporal dementia at the other end of the spectrum with no motor symptoms. And all the people who sit somewhere along that spectrum with different degrees of those different clinical features. You might say, is it helpful to split and stratify patients into these subgroups and subtypes? I think the answer to that is mainly yes. What we hope is that we can find markers for people who sit in these different subtypes that will tell us a bit more about the different mechanisms that underlie the cause of motor neuron disease. But it's also increasingly suggested that if you sit here in this part of the subtyping, you may be susceptible and respond well to drug A, for instance. But if you sit here in this part of the spectrum, then you may need drug C or D or a combination of A and C to show an improvement in your disease. At the moment, we're very much treating this group, everybody, with one drug per trial. And it's perhaps not surprising that we've not been successful so far in finding lots of drugs that help this disease, because we probably need to understand a lot more about this stratification. So another word that you're going to hear about today is biomarkers, because these are the things that we've all been looking for, both clinically and scientifically, that mark particular features of the disease that we can address. Why are biomarkers important? Well, they should help us to diagnose people earlier, and that's a good thing. And it will help us to pick people who might respond better to certain drugs. And it'll probably help us track those people across things like clinical trials, so that trials could be shorter and smaller and hopefully more successful. So let me show you a little bit about how biomarkers work. If I show you this part of a picture, everybody in this room knows well that that's an elephant. Okay? So your brain, very cleverly, is able to look at a little bit of a picture and compute immediately that if there's a trunk, it has to be an elephant. Now that's because you've spent your lives gleaning lots of facts about the natural world, seeing lots of images, listening to David Attenborough too much perhaps, and so your brain immediately can put trunk, elephant together. You also know that in this natural world there is no other animal that has a trunk like that. So if you see a trunk, it has to be an elephant. So a trunk is an excellent, unique identifier or biomarker for being an elephant. Now, unfortunately, biomarkers are not as easy as that to find. They're not as obvious as elephants. For instance, not everything that looks like a leopard turns out to be a leopard. and we've had this problem all along with research, that we just don't always hit the spot. So, unfortunately, we're still at the stage, not like your brain that's got all the information it needs to recognise an elephant. We're still at the stage of finding all the pieces of this disease, examining them individually, working out how to fit them together, and looking for bits that perhaps are still missing before we can get this full picture and say, oh, it's an elephant. Okay. Now, all of this research, be it scientific laboratory research or clinical research, is of course pointless unless it improves the lives of people with this disease. And so a number of today's speakers are going to talk about care and health care and looking after people with this condition. Person-centred care is a current term for how you should structure health services for people with these sorts of diseases, particularly chronic long-term diseases. It's a thing that's close to my heart. It's something that we've done a lot of work on over the years, but I think we probably aren't quite there yet, and it will be interesting to hear all the pitfalls that people do experience when they get a disease like this, and one good reason to have a person talking to us first about it. So people are going to talk to you about improving symptoms in the condition, improving survival of the condition. How do we measure and how do we improve quality of life? And we're also together not going to shy away from talking about the end of life and how we manage that. But lastly, we're going to move to finding a cure. And so our last speakers are going to talk very much about this sweet spot, the area, the place we all want to be. But you don't need me to tell you that there is much about motor neuron disease that is bittersweet. And I just wanted to pause to acknowledge the very great contribution of Dr. Ian Davis, who died from motor neuron disease very recently. Ian was one of the founding members of Fight MND. He collaborated with the Motor Neuron Disease Research Institute of Australia. His main focus was on trying to speed up the process of finding a cure. Ian probably typifies for me what patients have taught me over the years that I've worked in this area. that people are strong, they're very adaptable, that whilst they ultimately accept this disease, they certainly don't give in to it. And their focus tends to be very much on helping others. And what they want is a better future. We all, after all, live our lives for the people we hold most dear, for our work and for what we can achieve in life. Ian achieved a very great deal. So I would like to finish by asking you to join me in a round of applause for Ian, but not just Ian, for all of you in this room who I think all probably work very hard and contribute, and all the people in the MND community who help raise awareness of this disease, who help raise funds for this disease and the research we're going to talk about today, but also help care for people with this disease. So please join me in a round of applause for yourselves.